a good time. Put a smile on your face, yeah. KB Cam and Elation Radio. Even brighten your day and help you through the night. Bringing you good music. KB Cam and Elation Radio. And here's your host, KB Cam.
Hey, man, Black Lives Matter. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Elation Radio. This is Mr. Sedric with Relentless. Today's February the 18th, 2022. Man, I remember growing up as a kid, not even thinking that we were going to be here this long, right? and we've been having some pretty good discussions. I've been hanging out with my buddy Jason, just talking about some things on Black History Month. I know most of us were celebrating. We're looking for all the great things in Black History Month. I am too, but I just have some questions this month, and I'm just trying to get them answered. Just trying to talk them out, allow us to think a little bit about some of the things that are really going on, and not to be Debbie Downer, but we basically, when you know, you do. Okay, that's my favorite saying. When you know, you do. When you know something's wrong, you do something to correct it. You hear me? You know something's going well, you do something to make it even better or continue the good thing that's going. And when you know something's unfair, then you do something about it being unfair. You try to make it more fair. So that's kind of been my whole stance this month. And, you know, I'm not going to stop it today. I'm going to say it like that. You know, today my question was a simple one. You know, I've asked a question this month. My initial question was, you know what? Is racism baked into the fabric of America? Inherently is America racist, right? And then last week we talked about our church, the way we do church. Is it inherently racist, right? And today I got a question, because my question is a very simple one. Like talk about education. And I want to talk about, is our system of education, just by nature of the way we do education in America, is it inherently racist? So that's my question, and I got my own theory, but I won't get all into my theory just yet. We'll talk it out. We'll see where we come out on the other side. So for the next hour, I want to bring on my good friend Jason. Are you on with me yet, Jason?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, buddy.
Hey, my man. How we doing today?
No, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, as Mr. Rogers would say. It's just a beautiful day, man. I've been struggling. I've been kind of waiting to talk about this a little bit. I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but man, you know, with everything that's going on in the world, and we're seeing how theories, and we're just seeing how we're doing life in this world right now. I had a question, and our system of education. I wanted to ask if it was inherently racist, because I you know, growing up, we lived in decent neighborhoods, but I also lived in some not good neighborhoods. I went to good schools. I went to some schools that maybe they weren't so good. But in talking with a number of people that I know here in Louisville, Kentucky, and also in Cincinnati, and also Chicago and Dallas, man, it's so much going on in schools that I didn't know about. Like, you know, unless you're a part of the system, you don't know. So I just had a question, and that question is a simple question. I mean, hopefully we can get it answered. We can talk it through today, Jason, and we can answer the question, or maybe you can change my mind. But my question is, you know, is our education system inherently, is it biased or is it racist just by the way we do education in America? What you think about that? You think it's a good question?
That's a real good question, and I think as we explore the answer, you know, I'll tell you originally off the top of my head when you first floated that, I'm like, well, I don't think education could be racist. You know, maybe some of the educators may be that way, but the more I looked into this, and I looked at the systems that we have set up and how school is being done, from like what's being taught in the schools, who's teaching the schools, how schools are being funded, you see a underlying theme where the subjugation of one race over the other, or the promotion of one race over the other, continues to go through that. So I would have to say just yes. I think as you start looking into education and race, you would see that there is a hint, there is a an avenue of racism in our education system when you talk about how it's currently being done.
Yeah, and that's my big deal. My big deal is how it's being done, because I was doing a little homework and I came across an article by Stephen, I think his name is pronounced Heiss, and it's an old article all the way back from 2014, but he cited in his article, he talked about education. And he talked about the Department of Education, and they released some documents. Now, this is the data I'm going to read off to you here. I've got some up-to-date data, but this one is just something that's disclosure. It's a little bit older, but it stood out to me. And one of the things it said, it listed, I think it's about 14 things that it said was wrong or that was disturbing about the way we do education in America. Check this out. It gave a breakdown of some key findings that they had. And the first one, and tell me what you think about this, it says black students accounted for 18% of the country's pre-K enrollment, but made up 48% of preschoolers with multiple out-of-school suspensions. Wait a minute. I'm going to make that in plain English. Black students made up 18%. Now we're talking pre-K, okay? And they were 48% of the kids who were suspended from school. And when we're talking pre-K, truthfully, James, I'm just going to be honest, I didn't even know pre-K kids got suspended. You're pre-K. What can you do to get suspended? I don't even know.
How much damage can you do, before you're age 6? I mean, seriously?
Yeah, I came to school. It reminds me of the Cleveland show. Rollo, the little kid, he's 5 years old. The little dude can do everything. He talks like a pretty hood little dude. He got a little afro, But I'm just saying, what can they do? And then the next disturbing statistic they found, it says black students were expelled at 3 times the rate of white students. American Indian and Native Alaskan students represented less than 1% of students, but 3% of all expulsions. Check this out. Now, here's one that really got me. Black girls were suspended at higher rates than all other girls and most boys. I'm going to stop on that statistic right there. And the reason I want to stop on it is I've been hearing, I've talked to a couple of school teachers and administrators and even a college professor. And girls, believe it or not right now, Jason, believe this statistic. Girls get into more fights in school than boys now. It's like the girls are the ones walking around starting to fight is what I'm learning. And I'm like, really? What is so wrong with our system in America? And this actually spills over to bigger than the education system, that now we have girls who are bullying people and girls who are fighting people. That's almost unheard of when I was in school. Yeah, girls got into fights, but it was at 1 in 200, right? And so that's kind of scary. That's kind of scary to me. But back to the other disturbing fact. Here's another one, Jason. Did you know this? Nearly 1 in 4 boys of color accepting Latino and Asian American students with disabilities received an out-of-school suspension. So, with the exception of Latino and Asian American students, nearly 1 in 4 boys of color with disabilities received an out-of-school suspension. What's a disability? I mean, because I've heard, and I don't know if you know this, Jason, but I've heard that some of the students with disabilities, they may be classified as slow, I guess the word I'm looking for. They were put in special ed classes, but it's because they weren't taught before. Like in other words, you didn't learn to read in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, so now you're in 7th grade, you still can't read. Well, what they do, they put you in a special ed class. Now, that's just what I heard. That's what I've been told. And is that a qualification? And this is 1 in 5 girls of color with disabilities received an out-of-school suspension. And I'm just going to go ahead and read through a few more. Stop me when you want to say something, Jason. And it says a quarter of schools with the highest percentage of Black and Latino students did not offer Algebra 2. Now, wait a minute, I'm going to stop right there. It says a quarter of the schools with the highest percentage of Black and Latino students did not offer Algebra 2. Jason, how old were you took Algebra 2?
I think I was still in middle school. Maybe first part of high. Yeah, it was pretty early. Early.
Yeah, I was in I went from a tag program in elementary to I forget what they called it in junior high academics or something like that. I forget what it was. But same thing. I started in pre-algebra, and by the time I left 8th grade, I was already starting Algebra 2. So my freshman year, I didn't have to start in algebra, right? Algebra 1, I started Algebra 2. So I guess what I'm saying is see, some of these statistics, I'm not even going to read off every single one, but some of these statistics, how we do education in America, is it inherently racist? And the point I want to make out is why is it, and why do you think, Jason, your kids are younger, they're still in school. Why do you think that children of color are disciplined more harshly than other kids? I'm going to say it like that. I'm going to try to be politically correct with that. Than other kids.
I would tell you what I've noticed is and very rapidly label a child of color as disruptive, as defiant, as troublemaker, when there's a cultural difference in how kids interact with parents and adults, right? And I noticed this with my own child, right? When I deal with him, I'm pretty strict and I'm pretty stern, right? There is no leeway. There is no moving back and forth. So what I notice is when he goes to school, some of the teachers, they want to deal with the children and like, oh, hey, little Tommy, how's everything going? And unfortunately, I actually had to change the way I was working with my son at home, because what I realized, I was basically teaching him to respond to that more assertive attitude and behavior. So when he's got a less assertive one, it didn't really redirect him. So I had teachers telling me, well, your son's unruly and he just can't be under control. I'm like, no, he's not unruly, not under control. Y'all just too soft. But what I realized is like, you know what? It's not them being too soft. It's you creating an environment that's what he responds to. And I think a lot of kids, they grow up in households where they have very strict discipline, guidelines, things are expectation and things like that. So when they get into these classrooms, these teachers think these kids are unruly, when in reality it's like they're not used to not having a very firm structure in place, right? So instead of these teachers maybe saying like, hey, let me be a little bit more stern with this kid, they want to label him as a troublemaker. And I've seen it in elementary. I'm like, these aren't bad kids. They're just because I'll tell you, like my son, I can walk into a room, hey man, stop that, and he'll stop. And I have a certain tone in my voice, and he knows that, okay, Daddy's not playing. Well, these same teachers would be like, oh, can you don't do that? And I'm like, he didn't respond. So I had to quickly pivot myself to set my son up. And I think too many times these teachers, when they get these kids and these kids are not responding to what they feel like is the appropriate level of firmness, they're like, well, these kids are unruly. And I'm like, oh, not really. It's like, if you watch that kid operate with somebody else who may be a little bit more firm with them, they're just as responsive as other kids. Right. And I think that part of that is that cultural difference. But instead of trying to navigate that cultural difference, it's just either you label him like troublemaker, unruly. No, he can't be in his classroom. Something's wrong with him. Is he getting and then they get salty. Well, is he being loved at home? I'm like, I was like, wow. So as a parent, you start hearing this, you're like, it's like, huh? What? It's like, okay. But yeah, I think when you talk about the discipline in schools, I think there's a vast cultural difference, and instead of, I'm a big fan about communication, and I'm like, for me, communication is, if I'm the person communicating the message, maybe I need to adjust what I say, how I say it, to make sure the message get across. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
when it comes to like working with the kids, the teacher are like, well, I should just be able to say, please don't do that, and that should be enough. Well, I mean, if that kid, you get them at 6 years old, right? Even let's say
Yeah.
kindergarten, you get them at 5 years old. For 5 years, that
Yeah.
kid ain't never heard, please don't do that, for him to stop stuff, right? So,
Right.
instead of like labeling him, why don't you find ways to work with them, right? But I always tell parents, I'm like, man, you can't be that hard on your kid, because when they go to school, the teachers aren't going to mirror you, and what they're going to do, instead of really getting your kid in line, they're just going to label them, and they're going to try to get them out the classroom. They're going to call them disruptive. So, yeah, I always warn parents about that.
And that's funny, because you were touching on a point when you talked about the discipline. You were touching on a point. This was a topic of discussion for myself and one of my friends that I talked to who works in the school system. And I was told that there are students who they go into a class and they have a white teacher, and the teachers address the kids in a few different ways. But one of the ways, they allow the black kid to do what he or she wants, and all they say is, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. Basically, don't tell them what to do. They make a suggestion, right? And these kids aren't used to that, so there's no real structure in the classroom, right? And then there's an attitude amongst some teachers where they say, well, they let them slide because they say, well, their home life must not be very good, right? They must have a horrible home life, so I'm going to let them kind of do what they do, and I'll make suggestions here and there until they get too unruly, and we'll put them out of class. And then there are some teachers who just would much rather send them to the principal's office or out in the hallway so they don't have to deal with them. I think one of the problems we have in our education system is we have we can tackle all of, a bunch of issues, but I just want to hit this one. I think that we have teachers who are ill-equipped to be teachers. You understand? They don't have the know-how. Because I know for a fact that in some of the schools, when you get to some of the black schools that or the lower income schools, not just black, they could be different, they can be Latino or whatever, but the teachers they have, they don't even have all of the necessary training or certifications, right? They have the bare minimum, like they are barely teachers basically, right? And they don't have the let's put it this way. The statistic is that 60% of the teachers don't meet all state certifications and licensure requirements. In other words, these teachers are not even fully qualified to be teaching, but they're teaching, and they put them in the lower income schools. And why is it, Jason, do you think that some of the lower income schools are the most unruly schools? And one of the reasons I think is the teachers are ill-equipped. All right, they don't put the best teachers in the worst schools, right? They make the worst school the worst school. They don't put the best teachers in the schools that have the worst education, right? The worst grades or the worst averages, or however you want to put it. They put the youngest, most ill-equipped teachers there, and I'm not saying that putting the best teachers in those schools is the right thing, but how else do you teach somebody? And so I struggle with that. And
yeah, I want to touch on, like, when you talk about teachers being ill-equipped. I think one of the things that I've seen, and I've actually experienced when I was coming up, is that point where, I'm going to let you slide because, I think your home life is horrible, or I think something's going on with your home life. I'm gonna be real. That's that plantation mentality. I gotta help colored kids because they're lesser than, right? Instead of and I work with children. I work with children in church. I tell people the same thing. Whatever standard you hold the kid to is what they're going to meet. So if you think a kid is lesser than, or he has a bad home life, that's fine, but you don't shift the standard. You teach them how to work within the standard that you gave them and overcome that, right? So that plantation mentality tells you, well, they just don't have a lot, so we just have to just let them slide. And ultimately, that's so damaging for the kids, right? And so when you talk about, yes, yeah.
No, go ahead. I got a question when you're done. Go ahead.
No, so when you talked about ill-equipped, it's not just from an educational perspective. It's kind of a mindset perspective, right? Because if you, like you said, if you let that standard fall for that kid, then that's all they're ever going to reach. And I think that's the most unfair thing to happen to a kid.
And I totally agree with that. I totally agree because, again, being in some of these schools, and talking to some of these teachers, you understand that most of the first-year teachers go to the schools that are predominantly, other than white, I'm going to say it like that, predominantly black and Latino. First-year teachers, right out of school. Now, I ain't saying that's the worst thing in the world. Some of these teachers are highly motivated, and they're ready to go. But then we got some teachers who have been in the system too long, right? They just waiting to get their pensions. They just drawing a check. Well, we need teachers. Like everybody knows throughout the country right now, we have a shortage of teachers. They're bringing teachers out of retirement, right? Do we really want teachers who are not, what's the word I'm looking for, who are not sold out to teaching kids actually in the classroom? Because I'm going to make an argument for you real quick, Jason. I'm going to make an argument for you. A good friend of mine, his wife's grandfather was a principal back before integration, right? Before they integrated schools. And her grandfather was a principal, and he was a black man, and he said that he was completely against integrating schools. Why do you think his reason was? He was completely against integrating our schools. Why?
I think to the point where, you got to think about like learning and teaching, right? In order for teaching to be effective, you've got to be able to relate to the person disseminating that information. Now, as we get older, we can see certain things, like, okay, I see that you have a certain knowledge base, and I can see that you can help me and teach me. But young kids, they've got to relate to the person that's teaching them. So if you bring somebody in that doesn't look like that student, doesn't understand that student, maybe from a different perspective, grew up a little bit different from that student, it's going to be hard for that student to connect, to let real learning occur. That would be my thoughts about why he avoided integration. What was his? Did he give the reason for avoiding the integration?
That basically what you said. He said that, look, if we now again, this is in the South. I believe he was in Mississippi, and we're talking again before they integrated schools. He said, let me give you a little background. Now, I don't know if you ever talked to anybody who was a teacher from way back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Black teachers taught black students. Black teachers were not necessarily easy on these black students. But these students, if my dad were still alive today, he'd be somewhere in his 80s, maybe early 90s, right? He said that everybody took trigonometry, right? He says, you're going to take geometry, you're going to take calculus in high school, right? He says you're going to learn it. You're going to start algebra, according to my dad, as I remember from a kid, you're going to start algebra in your 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in there, and you're going to be taking math mostly throughout high school, right? He said everybody was taking trig when he was in school. They weren't doing that when I was in school. So the thought was, from what I understand, the thought was, we know how to teach our kids. We value the education of our kids, so we're going to do more for our kids, and we're going to push them, not in the negative way. We're going to do everything we can to teach them so that they can leave this school and be effective on a job. And he said that if you put white people in charge of these kids, they're not going to care as much. They're not going to care. They're going to kick them out of school. They're not going to teach them. They're not going to go the extra mile. They're not going to get the tutoring they needed. In other words, he was saying that if we integrate schools, we are now saying it's okay to really not teach our kids. He said they were going to get a subpar education because they were going to go to schools where people didn't care about them, or they were going to go to schools because here's the thing. Even in the schools in the South back then, listen, they had old, tattered, used books. They didn't have the new, up-to-date stuff, but they had teachers who cared and teachers who taught. They cared about the kids, and teaching was all about, you know how they say, reach one, teach one, or teach one, reach one. I may have the saying backwards, but they took an interest in every single kid. So he didn't want to integrate schools for that reason, because he thought that whites would not care. They wouldn't be compassionate about educating the black kids. He thought that was a fail. And what's funny is we find that in our education system, like some of those stats I was telling you about, we find that, you know what, some of that's true. Our kids aren't truly being taught. You know what I'm saying? Like think about it. No,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
What I was saying that. Yeah, go ahead. So what I was saying was, like, to piggyback on for you how you started, right? I think that principal was saying something, right? These teachers aren't going to care about these students as much as white teachers aren't going to care about students as much as black students were. But I think that goes back to what we've always said, is that in our system in this country, black people are seen differently, right? Because everybody as an adult, we know the power of education and how it's lifted us up, even in any aspect of my life, whether it be like I learned a trade and that knowledge helped me get this job that's allowing me to take care of my family, right? An adult knows that. So when I see a child, a small child who's on the precipice of growth, and I really want them to grow, and I care about their upbringing, if I see that child as a child, then my heart's going to be committed to how do I help that child get to being like you said, an effective adult. But in our system here, and we talked about this all the time, black people aren't even seen as human. So you get these teachers who are looking at this, what we will see as child, but just looking at this person, and without that same sympathy, without that same empathy, without that same desire to be like, you know what, I want to help you become the best version of you can be, then you start getting what you said, where teachers aren't really engaged. They're not really trying to teach. They're just kind of in the classroom collecting a check, And so I think that principal, was kind of right on the money with it. How when you have people teaching with children that they don't know, they may not be as connected to them and as vested into their success as someone who is in that community.
And see, that's the thing. Like, we talk about community a lot. I remember when I was in junior high school, and I love this teacher to death. She was so smart. My AP history teacher, she lived like I lived 2 blocks from the school, and she probably lived 6 blocks from the school. Like, my old Spanish teacher, I still remember Mr. Johnson. My old Spanish teacher still lives in my old neighborhood. Well, as of I think I saw him like 10 years ago. As of 10 years ago, he still lived in the old neighborhood. Like, we had teachers who lived in our neighborhoods. Like, my teacher knew my mom. They would see us in the grocery store from time to time, and it's like now we're so disconnected. Again, I can talk about the rates of discipline in school and the way why black kids are disciplined a lot more harshly than other students. Students of color are disciplined more harshly than our white counterparts. And I think you said something, Jason, is at least I'm paraphrasing what you said, is that they don't look like us, right? And then if a child of color, especially a black kid, does something that's crazy, he's seen as, here it is, a young man, and he's 13, 14. But by the same token, a senior in high school who's white is seen as a kid. He's only an 18-year-old kid. Well, I don't get it. They did the same thing. The white student is older than the black student. Why is the black student in an alternative school for the rest of the year? The white student is allowed to come back. You know, when I think about stuff like that, I also ask on the other side, what can we do about this? As parents, what can we do? Now, I'm going to tell you, Jason, you know me. My kids went to a predominantly white school, and it was what it was. They didn't get in any trouble. They played sports. The teachers were very, in my opinion, very lenient. I remember my youngest daughter, I went to a volleyball game, and she was calling her teacher by her first name. And I went and I talked to her. I said, Miss So-and-so, whatever her name was. I said, I pulled her to the side, and I asked her do not allow her to call you. But there's a level of respect that needs to be maintained. She needs to know who you are and your position, and she is not your buddy. I was so upset with that teacher. I mean, they were carrying on like they was both the same age. I don't understand that. I don't understand it. And, and it was like no big deal to her. But it's a big deal to me. Because you know why it was a big deal to me? Because just like my daughter had discipline at home, she didn't have no discipline at school. So when she came home, sometimes she forgot she was at home. She thought she was still at school. And I get it. You want kids to fit in, but that's not the answer, because all it takes is that one time. JC, you know I ain't making this up. All it takes is that one time, and then she's kicked out of school, or he or she is kicked out of school. And once you get kicked out of school one time, you're prone to get kicked out twice. Well, what happens to kids who keep getting expelled from school? They lose interest.
Right.
And I don't know what the system does. Like, have you ever had any problems with your kids at school at all?
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said, my son's a little bit more active, and it actually got to the point where the teacher did not want him in his classroom, and every time he walked in the classroom, she found a reason to put him out. And it got to the point where I'm blessed that my kids are very, intellectually gifted, where, him getting put out every time didn't really affect his schooling, right? It didn't affect his ability to learn, to be successful in school, make good grades. But I think about that. It got to the point where he would walk in the classroom, and within 5 minutes, she was sending him to the office. And part of that was the frustration she had with him. So what?
Yeah, but so was your son doing something?
I mean, don't get me wrong. He wasn't a model student. And once again, he wasn't as responsive as she wanted him to be. But
what
I
do you
think
mean?
and that's why.
What do you mean?
Right, where hey, I need you to stop doing that. Can you please stop doing that? And of course he's like, no. Yes, right. And so that's one of the things that really showed me that I'm like, hey, I have to be different, not just because I'm placating. I just have to set him up for success. And if it's the only thing he's going to respond to is that that sternness, but that's not what the teachers are going to give him, then I had to make the change at home. And I made the change at home, because I'm like, I can't have you going to school acting like this, getting put out of class. Like I said, luckily his grades weren't impacted, but it does. He started losing interest, in school, and he didn't care about school as much. Yeah.
You know what's funny about that? Do you understand that white people start to perceive, this is no joke, black boys as threatening at only 5 years old?
Wow.
At 5 years old, a 5-year-old kid, we got white people using words like violent and dangerous and hostile and aggressive to describe the behavior of a 5-year-old child. That's true. That's, and I'm telling you, it just bothers me. And the thing that we talk about suspensions and what really hurts these kids and what makes them fall behind academically is because they're not in school. And your son, trust me, you, like you said, you are blessed, because most kids, when they're suspended from school, they fall behind. Why? Either they don't get the work that they need, or they get it and they just don't do it. They don't get it turned in on time. Maybe they tried to turn it in and they turned it in late, and the teacher's like, nope, it's late, I ain't gonna take it. You know what I'm saying? And then where does that lead? Where does that lead? You know, that's where we get to this school to prison pipeline. Because think about it, they fall behind, they can't read, they don't know math, right? And this stuff happens. Here's the big deal, and I want people to understand this. This starts to happen. We're talking pre-K. Oh, we ain't even got to high school. We're talking pre-K. It starts to happen in preschool, and by the time they make it up through third grade, they are so far behind that they can never catch up, and they eventually drop out. That's right. And then sometimes what happens is they just push the kid on through. You know, I've heard here in Kentucky, that's basically what they, especially this year, that's what they're doing. You know what, you missed too many days, you fail in this class, well, you can take some makeup classes, you can get promoted even though you're dumb as a rock or you didn't learn anything. I'm going to say it like that. And what happens to these kids is we're talking about higher dropout rates. And, you know, when you drop out of school, Jason, what can you not effectively get? You cannot effectively get gainful employment. Am I right? You can't get a job without at least a high school education that's going to halfway pay your bills. You got to work 3 jobs. Think about this, Jason. How much would you say, you're in Dallas, how much would you say you need? And I know you know how to budget, but you know how to budget. How much would you say you need to earn a year to live comfortably? Single land, 1-bedroom apartment, car, job, entertainment. How much would you say you'd have to earn? Now use your frugal mind.
You're looking at $40,000 to $50,000 a year as a single one, renting an apartment with a car and a car payment and the insurance, you know, to live comfortably, right? To be able to say, hey, I can eat, you know, I can do all these other stuff, I can experience, pay for gas, you know, because here in the metroplex, you got to drive everywhere because ain't no place close. You know, you're looking, you know, from 40 to 50 grand a year. You know, that's a $20 hour job that you have to get. Mm-hmm.
So that's okay. Let's just go low on the low end. Let's say 40 grand, right? And 40 grand, and you don't have a high school education. Like, how much money are they making out there with that high school education? How much is, I don't know, how much these lawn boys get paid? These guys out mowing grass, how much they making? $300 a week? $400 a week?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's give them 500. Let's say 600. That's $12 an hour. 600. For real, you can't make it. And so, you know, that's what happens when our kids are suspended from school. That's eventually what happens. And so now all of a sudden they start committing crimes. And sometimes they ain't even committed a crime. They get profiled in the stores. But it for me, when I think of our education system, when I look at everything, when I look at these expulsions and these suspensions, that's what I'm looking at. And then, you know, I'm looking at kids who are on their way to not graduate. And then think about this. There's something, and I talked about this just a tad bit. But what about our kids who are intelligent? Some of our kids are bored in class, and not because they don't know the work. Like, I'm going to be honest, being in some of the classes I was in, I didn't make the best grades. But it's because I was bored to death. I didn't get in no real trouble.
Mm-hmm.
All I did was talk, right? But I was bored to death. And when they put me in the TAG programs, the classes started to challenge me. I'm going to tell you what happened to me, Jason. Me personally, what happened to me was this. The work became hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
It made me have to focus. My teacher no longer had to say, Sedric, sit down and be quiet. What are you doing? Be quiet. Because I was struggling with this work. I was like, man, I got to catch up, right? I got to stay on top of this. So I found myself going home and studying this work. And you know what happened to me? I developed good study habits and didn't even know it because my teacher kept encouraging me. The first teacher I had, her name was, I forget her name, but she always told me, Sedric, you can do the work. I just need you to focus. Always told me that. And then by the time I got to junior high school, my teacher was like, you got it. Just do it. And when I said I needed help, they didn't laugh at me, Jason. My teachers helped me. Now, I would love to tell you all of my teachers were black, but they weren't. The first teacher I had in Talented and Gifted, she was white. When I got to junior high school, my AP or advanced history teacher, she was black. My Spanish teacher was black. My science teacher was white. You hear what I'm saying? I mean, I had a host of different ethnic backgrounds. I had Spanish teachers and or Mexican teachers, and they taught me. But you know, they showed an interest in me, and it was something about me. All of my teachers, they showed an interest in me. They had my best. They wanted the best for me. But I also know I knew other students because they were troublesome, because they were labeled, and I knew that there were teachers who really, like my gym teachers. And I hate to say this, but my gym teachers, yeah, they just looked at, and I hate to say it, but one of my teachers, he basically said to this effect, you guys, it was a group of black guys, you guys run faster already, so we're going to let these kids go first, and y'all can go catch them. For real? That was a gym teacher told us that. For real?
Wow.
That's how we run relays now. We get them a head start. So they got a chance to win. I promise. That was one of my gym teachers. And so anyway, I'm going to go back to the talented and gifted programs. Is that in our schools today, think about this. Think about, were you ever in one of those programs, Jason?
The gifted and talented, yeah.
Okay. So when you looked across your room, when you looked around your room, how many of y'all were of color in there?
Not very many.
I'm going to tell you, and I remember this because the first time I was ever in the class, there was 2 blacks, and I think we had a couple of Hispanics, and we had maybe 3 or 4 Asians. And I say Asians, I don't mean no disrespect. They could have been Chinese. They could have been Korean. I just don't know what their nationalities were. And everybody else was white. Now, the class wasn't that big. We had 20-something students. That was it. But when I looked around, I was like, wow. And when I would enter spelling bees, it wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot. And so, you know, these programs, I think that in the schools that are predominantly schools of color, they don't have a lot of these programs. And when they do, the students who are in the programs don't represent the students in the school. And I think that's crazy. I think that's crazy because the thing is, when you look at it, how do I say it? When you look at it and you see that you're in these high achieving classes, you got these students who are high achieving, you want, I hate to say it, but you're more likely to have white students and white teachers than you are any other nationality in them. And that's crazy. And what kind of real bias does that show? Because what if my teacher didn't recognize that I wasn't a disruptive student, I was just bored? And what if she had started sending me to the office rather than giving me work that was a little more difficult, that required me to study more, and for her to find, you know what, he's really got what it takes. And then for me to have to go and do whatever tests I had to do and then get moved to a higher class, a class which I made better grades in the talented and gifted program than I did in the regular class. Ain't that crazy?
Mm-hmm.
That's weird to me. And so think about how they even identify kids who are gifted. I mean, how do they? Again, with my teacher and my personal experience, it was because one teacher recognized something. But with other kids, I think at the beginning of the year, didn't we have to take tests?
Some type of standardized test
and
is typically the way. Yep.
That's what happened. We had to take tests. And like I know these standardized tests, oh, man. Have you ever taken an IQ test?
No, not particularly. Not a straight IQ test. I've taken some personality tests that has like an IQ evaluation in it.
Wow. Okay. Because that it's kind of it's an experience for me. It was a tough thing. I took one. I got here 2004. I think it was like 2007, 2008. But it's funny is when you they did a study one time about a school district in Florida, right? And what they did was they changed their screening criteria for identifying kids who were gifted, right? And what happened was that they found that there was a number of gifted students, right? They found that the number of gifted students in all racial categories, it rose, and then since they weren't relying on the parental referrals that they were using at that time, man, they saw that these students, I mean, there was no real difference in them. You know what I'm saying? And when they start using the standardized test, you see a fall off, right? You see a fall off, and they basically concluded that nonverbal tests, how do I say it, are more objective. They're the better way to identify the gifted kids than any sort of verbal test. And they did this test amongst second graders, but why is that? Why is it everything? I know that everything has to kind of cant one way or another. I did a program one time, and we were talking about artificial intelligence, and we said, could artificial intelligence be biased or racist? And the real answer to that was yes. And the reason is, if we're using AI, we're scanning, right? You know how when you go into a restroom and they've got the dryers on the wall and you wave your hand under it? And then it turns on and blows the air in your hands. Well, if they only tested people who had very light skin complexion, right, very light skin, they put it under the light, the dryer comes on. Now a person comes in with very dark complexion, and they put their hand under it, and it doesn't come on. It's only as good as the information you feed into it. So our
right.
society, our system of teaching our kids is only as good as the information we put into it, right? Think about this. Our education system, would you believe that that our education system has a lower quality education for students of color? Do you believe that?
Yeah.
Of course, you and I both know.
That's believable. Yeah.
It's true. And then this is throughout all the research. You know, here's another problem we have in our education system, I think. And this spills out into our everyday lives, is that students of color are over-policed and they're segregated. You ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, if you think about like I said, just how that, and I think that goes more to what we've been talking about, how people see other people, right? It goes to like how I view you, how I see you. And when you start looking at that, and you start looking at, you know, when I just get dumbfounded when I see adults, like white adults, interact with black children in a manner in which it's like, how would you interact with any child in that manner? And the only thing I can realize is that you don't see a child, right? You don't see. You know, I remember that video where it was a bunch of kids, and you know they were young, like 13, 14, and they were, they had this group surrounded, and this little girl rose up on this 300-pound man, and he just decks her like she's a grown man, and I'm like, hey, everybody watched the video. Well, she was a threat. She's a 13-year-old girl, right?
That
how
was
do you
the police
look at
officer,
that?
right?
Oh no, it was a regular civilian. I think later on it was kind of at a mall. He was there with his wife, and they were and don't get me wrong, these kids were well way out of line. I'm not going to try to justify their actual behavior, but all I know is this: I'm a parent. Let some little 13-year-old person run up on me. I am not going to hit you with all my strength like a full-grown man, and I mean hit you like you're an adult. I'm gonna find a way, to pacify the situation and to make sure that I am the adult. But when I saw that, and I saw that dude and how he reacted, the first thing I thought of and he had kids her age. I'm like, what are you looking at when you throw that punch, right? You're not looking at a child.
You know what he's looking at,
right?
Nope.
And that's the part I struggle with. It's like, how can you see another human being, a child, a human child, and not respond that way? And the only thing I can conclude was he didn't see a human, right? He didn't see somebody. He didn't see a child because she looked different or act different. He saw something different, and I think that goes when you start talking about that and how people view things. That's a systemic thing, and I don't think it changes just because of your job or your title. Right, I just think that's something that's ingrained. So these teachers, these principals, these resource officers at the school, they have that perspective, and they approach and they deal with people with that perspective, and we wonder why we have so many issues. Right, they want to say that, they have more discipline issues. Do they have more discipline issues, or are they just being dealt with a little bit differently? Right, and so it's a struggle. It's hard. It's just hard.
See, I think our schools today do a really poor job of preparing our students for real life. And I think if we approach the classroom similar to real life, and what I mean by that is I found it, I was a JROTC cadet, and I love JROTC. Credit my instructors for everything that made me better in life. They treated us like, here it is, adults. We were young adults to them. They gave us assignments to do them. We came into class. They taught us what to do. They expected us to do it. If we needed help, they expected us to help one another. Right? You ask your buddy, hey, they explained this 3 times. I don't get it. How do you get it? Can you help me? And they made us work together as teammates. And then we had a structure because we went by military hierarchy. So we had a structure, and that's the way we did everything in JROTC, everything. And I thought that was awesome, and it helped me out. But what it also helped with, here it is, and I'm going to tell you, it helped in every facet. I know we got to get ready to go in just a minute, Jason, but we'll take a couple more minutes here. But it helped in every facet of the game for me because I had to be taught. So I learned to follow, right? I learned to take I learned to work with my peers because they had to teach me how to do what I needed. If I needed homework in math, there was a student who was good in math, who was an upperclassman usually. They would sit down with me and say, okay, this is how I did it. So I learned. They taught me. How does that equate out into the real world? Well, I learned to listen to people. I don't know everything, right? I learned to listen to people. It's like having a job. And then as I started to move up in my years and through the ranks, I was able to do the same thing with the students behind me. But also, if I saw some of those students outside of class, and let's say they were about to get into a fight, I would just kind of talk to them. I whisper in their ear, hey, man, you're in JROTC. Come on, man. We can't be out here acting like this. Come on, man. And then the other kids be like, y'all wearing that ugly pickle suit is what they used to call it, right? Because we wore green back then. And they made fun of the uniform, but it gave me personally a sense of pride because I got to clean up every week and basically wear a suit to school, which I ain't have any suits personally. So I got to wear a suit to school. I ain't got to worry about what I was going to wear on Tuesdays, right? I got to polish my shoes, learn a little pride. It helped develop something in me. And even my fellow cadets, we all felt the same way. We all started moving the same way. And it kind of helped me in every facet of my life. Because when I went to class, man, if my teachers threatened to tell my instructors that I was doing something out of the way, I was getting in trouble. My instructors didn't just come down on me. They didn't just send me to the, no, they sat us down. They talked to us. They counseled us like we were soldiers in the military. They treated us like we were college students. I mean, we were young adults to them, and that's the way they treated us. And there was a level of respect that we gained for our instructors and for one another. I don't see many teachers teaching that today. I don't even see them having time, to be honest, but I don't see them teaching that today at all. And maybe I'm expecting too much of a teacher, but I don't see that. There's like no real structure from what I understand in classrooms. Am I living in a fairyland? Is it a fairy tale?
No, I think you know, if you look at the military and how they indoctrinate and teach people, you've got to understand that these instructors, they understand what, if I don't teach you right, you could lose your life, right? So they are very invested in your success, invested in you getting these ideas. And I think when you know, people say whatever you want to say about the military, but I appreciate the military and the fact that they do. I mean, and yes, and still, they may be hard on you, but they're hard on you because they understand that if you don't get this, they're hard on you because they care. And they understand that if I don't get this done right, you're coming home in a body bag, coming back home to your parents, and they don't want to live with that. So they're invested and they care, and you don't see that type of a level of investment or caring in the school system, right? Part of it, teachers are overworked. They may not be they may be underpaid. You know, I think a lot of it, and I think you mentioned it, they're not in the same neighborhood as their kids that they're teaching, right? It's something to say like, hey, Mrs. Johnson in classroom, but then see Mrs. Johnson on the street, and you know, you ain't gonna act the same way, and she ain't gonna treat you the same way because she be like, I know your parents. And we used to have that. We used to have these small community schools, community churches where everybody knew everybody, and everybody had a vested interest in the success of each and every one. And I think, you know, whether you look at our education system, you know, we may think about maybe it's time to get back to that, you know, where teachers live in the community that they work. You know, we were already talking about it for police officers, but when you start disconnecting from the people that you're supposed to be responsible to and responsible for, it causes a lot, right? It does lead to situations where you may not be doing the right thing, you know, or you're not seeing them for what they really are. You're seeing them for something different. And I think, you know, when we talk about any interactions, I think we have to, like I said, it goes back to that perspective. Who am I looking at and who do I see? You know, do I see somebody that I can relate to, or do I see somebody totally different?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the big thing. I mean, because I'm just going to tell you, everybody, y'all already know my answer. Inherently, yes, our school systems are biased. They are racist. Okay, not just against black students, but students of color altogether. But I think that a big part of it is, the foundation was rotten. Okay, racism was here from the founding, and it doesn't always have to be this way, but it takes each and every one of us to make that change. And sometimes a person's not going to be able to look in the mirror and see the change they need to make. But the change that they know they need to make, it's going to come from one of us. Maybe we don't have to clobber each other over the head, but there is I believe that there is a way for us to not just navigate this system, this biased system we have, but to change the system so that everybody can navigate this system. If I had to answer, I'm going to be honest, I would tell everybody, okay? If we just recognize that we're all the same, all right? We're all the same, other than a little pigmentation in our skin, all right? We're all the same. If we can just grasp hold of that. But our education system is what it is. What we have to do is we have to be able to navigate this and do it the right way. Because, I mean, it's kind of scary seeing kids out here who they don't know who Fred Douglass is. They thought Fred Douglass was a rapper, for real. They don't know who Sojourner Truth is, right? They don't know who. I mean, we are. Here's the other thing, and Jason, we're gonna get ready to close out. But what do you think about them always talking about critical race theory in schools? First, what is critical race theory, right? What do you think about that whole talking point?
Tell you, I think people are conflating critical race theory with something that should be taught, and I appreciate you for challenging me to understand what critical race theory is. Right? When you look at critical race theory and the basis of it, it's illegal. It's actually a legal study, right? But
yes.
The part that I don't understand is we always try to tell our kids, hey, there are always two sides to the story. So to expand your perspective, let's hear both sides of the story, and then allow you to make the decision based on your heart, your what you grew up with, right? History tells us, America was a great country, right? And no one wants to tell us there's another side, there's another perspective of the U.S. and the U.S. history that's not so pretty. And I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but what's the problem with teaching both sides and then allowing that student, allowing that person to make a decision, based on what they see, what they experience. Some people can hear that, America was a bad place. The America I know, I can recognize some of the atrocities, but I can also recognize the good things. Some people may say, well, I agree because this is what I'm experiencing. But not to even allow that to be taught, I think is further indication that there is something in the system and it's known, and we're still trying to perpetuate it, and we don't want different perspectives to be shown. So when you talk about critical race theory, I think first and foremost, most people don't understand what critical race theory really is, and if you take a step back and say, what are you really fighting against, right? And what I see people are fighting against is a perspective of America that's different from what's in our history book, that's going to challenge the status quo and this thing that we think we are. And it's not a bad thing, because in that challenge could come the catalyst for change and reform. But
Absolutely.
Critical race theory is a hot topic, but I don't think people truly understand what it is.
And basically, and I've read it in the Webster's, all over. But basically, critical race theory, just so everybody even understands it, it's basically, and I'm gonna read part of my text here. It's a cross-disciplinary intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race and law in the United States, and to challenge mainstream American liberal approaches to racial justice. But the point I wanted people to understand is it's an intellectual study, right? And they want to examine the intersection of race and law in the United States. Ain't got nothing to do with teaching about slavery. Okay, it ain't got nothing to do. It ain't got nothing to do, because it's expanded in our schools right now to offensive words to the LGBT community, and they got a whole bunch of other letters. I'm sorry, I don't get it all right. They want to exclude everything that's not, and I hate to say it like this, but it feels like to me they want to exclude everything that's not lily white, right? And Southern American, okay? It's okay to have this Confederate rebel flag, but you can't be a boy who wears pink, or you can't be black and hanging out at night. I don't even understand it. I can't talk about Harriet Tubman, or learn about slavery, learn that there were white people who had black people that were enslaved. I can't learn, here it is. I'm not even learning about black people who were enslaved, and yet they were still genius inventors. Our system is so biased. And you know what? It's not. The system itself is biased just by nature of it being created by people who were and feel that way. But where does it all stop? Why can't we push this to another level? And that's the big push today. That's the big push today. Let's not play with this. I mean, people say in America justice is blind. What? Do you believe that? It's blind, but it ain't colorblind. I'm just gonna say it like that because think about it. If all of our laws were neutral, right? If we had just neutral laws, then why is it that all the outcomes seem to be, here it is, racially charged? All the outcomes have a racial component. Why? Black people of color seem to be getting the worst of everything. Jason, you sell crack, I sell crack. You white, I'm black. Guess what? You get 2 years, I get 10 years. This is both of our first incidents. Why? And so I will say, I'm going to close out here. Kim, you can go ahead and get us ready. But I'm going to go ahead and close out. I was just going to say this. Yes, I believe that our system it is what it is. And yes, it is discriminatory. Yes, it is racist. Can it be fixed? It can. We can all help fix it, but we got to get involved. And I don't know. I'm going to close out on that note. And Sister Kim, if you would, go ahead and kill our music. I just this is a good month. I just want to say, find something you love, embrace it, chase it. That is your relentless pursuit. This is Sedric. I'm signing off for the night. We're going to see y'all back next week. God bless you. We love you. Yeah, everybody have a good night.